The adventures of Tanjiro, Zenitsu, and Inosuke are the heart and soul of Demon Slayer's story. But what would happen if that wasn't the case? How would that early mission against the drum demon go if Zenitsu and Inosuke weren't around? Well, everything before Tanjiro met Zenitsu while traveling would remain the same. But in this timeline, instead of seeing Zenitsu, Tanjiro would see Genya. Tanjiro, rather than being repulsed by the Thunder Breather's harassment of a local woman, would be upset with Genya. Remembering his face, Tanjiro would be quick to act in the girl's defense, since Genya was involved in something very similar when they first met during final selection. When Genya was being rough and rude towards Master Ubuyashiki's daughter, Kanata, Tanjiro stepped in to help her. But despite that early encounter, Genya is very shy around women and really struggles to compose himself. Much to Tanjiro's surprise, it's all a big misunderstanding. Given his height, choice of weapons, hairstyle, facial scarring, and brooding demeanor, the woman assumed he was some sort of criminal that was up to no good. And when he tried to assure her that he meant no harm, thanks to his awkwardness, fumbling of words, and sinister-looking smile, the situation only got worse. After the girl manages to run away, Tanjiro is left to speak with Genya about proper conduct and treatment of women. This conversation would only frustrate Genya, who overall just really struggles with expressing himself. To interrupt him shouting back at Tanjiro, the two of them would be on the receiving end of a new mission. After heading up a mountain, Tanjiro and Genya would arrive at Suzumi Mansion. After Tanjiro caught the scent of blood in the air, the two boys would discover Shoichi and Teruko cowering in fear. Without Zenitsu's sparrow Chuntaro around, Tanjiro wouldn't be able to so easily calm their nerves. And again, with Genya's appearance, this would seem to be even harder. But given the circumstances and the scared look of the kids, Genya, as someone with a similar past, would appear to be surprisingly gentle here. And seeing as he comes from a family of many younger siblings, he may even carry a memento of theirs. A little toy to put these kids at ease. This would definitely catch Tanjiro's attention, as he'd now be able to see the brutish boy in a new light. Genya would resolve to defeat the drum demon on their behalf. Tanjiro at this time would be able to smell the boy's kindness, right along with his sadness and anger. And after seeing another child's discarded body, Tanjiro wouldn't even need to tell Genya to go in with him, since he would already be charging in himself. After the siblings follow them in, Genya would be pretty upset. But during the separation, he would be grouped up with Shoichi, while Tanjiro would end up with Teruko. From there, Tanjiro and Teruko would encounter the drum demon, Kyogai. As for Genya and Shoichi, instead of sliding open one of the room doors to see the boar-headed Inosuke, they would meet none other than Kanao. Genya might not be afraid of her like Zenitsu was of Inosuke, but suddenly seeing a girl here would definitely fluster and stagger Genya, who'd struggle and not know what to do. At Kanao's feet would be the disintegrated remains of the Horn Demon. Completely indifferent to his presence, Kanao would simply go about her business, leaving the two behind. Now at this point, Kanao was already a Tsuchinoto ranked Demon Slayer, and is generally stronger than both Tanjiro and Genya. So in this version of events, the Drum Demon is actually still a member of the 12 Kizuki, and is a more formidable threat. And just like how Inosuke stormed his way to Tanjiro's position, Kanao would do the very same thing. But instead of being problematic by attacking and using him as a launch pad, Kanao would be pretty cooperative. The problem would be her utter disregard for her own safety in favor of attacking the demon, which would result in her being hurt a bit. To her, this sort of thing would be par for the course and of no concern. But Tanjiro would see things very differently, urging her to instead be considerate of herself. In the midst of battle, there would be no opportunity for her to flip a coin to help her decide. This sort of situation would force her to make a choice on her own. Prematurely shifting her thinking like this would be even more debilitating, but knowing Tanjiro, he would offer the direction that when fighting as one, companions are supposed to lean on one another for support and direction instead of just thinking for themselves. Thankfully, this was able to suffice for the duration of their battle. As for Genya's battle against the Tongue Demon, when the monster decided to target the smaller boy first, Genya would shield the child with his own body, allowing the creature to land a concerning blow on him. One scary enough for Shoichi to pass out from the shock. But despite the monster's delight, he'd soon be horrified to see Genya biting into his tongue like taffy. Now taking on a more demonic appearance, Genya would unload on the creature, shooting it dead. Meanwhile, after fighting side by side for long enough, Tanjiro and Kanao would be able to successfully take down the drum demon together. Once they made their way out of the mansion, Tanjiro would see a sleeping Shoichi by a tree, while Genya held a sword above Tanjiro's box. With his senses still enhanced from demon consumption, he'd be able to sniff out the presence of a demon and would demand to know what Tanjiro was doing with one. Given his now beastly appearance, everyone would be on edge, including Teruko and the newly rescued Kiyoshi. Not wanting to fight, and without much of a choice, Tanjiro would explain his sister's predicament to them. At first, Genya would still be very much opposed, but as Tanjiro would continue, he'd gradually understand more and more. Considering how he berated his own brother Sanemi in protection of his then fading demon mother, he wouldn't have much ground to stand on in opposition. And as someone formerly of a family with 7 siblings and only one left living that he would do anything to reconcile with, Genya would eventually stand down. But besides Genya, there is also the issue of Kanao. She would want to take down Genya for being a demon, but on account of him being in the sun, that would not be the case. It was also against the rules for a demon slayer to harm a fellow demon slayer, and Kanao wasn't the type to break the rules. Also, Kanao's heightened sensory abilities were related to her eyes. And behind a closed box, she would have no way of confirming if there was actually a demon inside or not. And she's hardly the pushy type. Instead of doing anything that would prove to be problematic, she would just let it be and simply send word to someone in a higher position to make these sorts of decisions, aka the insect Hashira Shinobu. With all that out of the way, the newly formed trio would make their way to the wisteria-crested rest home. On account of being a girl, separate lodging would be prepared for Kanao. This would be convenient since Genya would be able to rest comfortably instead of anxiously. And because when Tanjiro decides to let Nezuko out, she wouldn't be around to confirm that Tanjiro has a demon with him. Although, Genya seeing Nezuko's adorable face as opposed to the hideously terrifying demon girl he had in his mind would pretty much negate the first point. After resting for a few days, the young demon slayers would receive an emergency summons calling them to Mount Natagumo. For the battles of this arc, it would be Genya versus the Father Demon, Kanao versus the Sun Spider Demon, and Tanjiro and Nezuko versus Rui as usual. Genya's fight against Father would be very interesting for his character. The Father Spider was extremely abusive towards his so-called wife, Mother Spider. He did this repeatedly on account of her being weaker than intended, and did so without ever really telling her why. This sort of behavior would really strike a nerve with Genya, who grown up with a father who abused their mother and all the children. This fight would be personal. That being said, it would be far from an easy fight for him. Genya doesn't have access to any breathing techniques, meaning his natural movements and strength are incredibly low compared to other demon slayers. And against someone like Father, whose flesh was so tough that neither Tanjiro nor Inosuke could cut through it with all their strength, he'd be pretty screwed. Not to mention, Genya is a marksman. He prefers to attack from range, but Father was a hulking melee brawler that would never give him the opportunity to get far enough. In the end, the only way for Genya to win this thing would be for him to fight extremely dirty. This demon has a total of 9 eyes, all of which, by nature of how eyes work, will be much softer than the rest of the monster's reinforced hide. Like puncturing liquid bubble wrap, Genya would gain access to the creature's blood, allowing him to then begin to manifest his own demon abilities. Not having to worry about mortal wounds anymore, all he would need to do is jam his shotgun into the other place the demon wouldn't be able to reinforce, the inside of his mouth. And just like that, Genya would win. By comparison, Kanao versus the Sun Spider would be much easier. Kanao's perceptive eyes would make her the ultimate counter to Sun Spider infection ability. Without that, his entire battle strategy falls apart. The sadistic demon would also really hate dealing with Kanao since she wouldn't be expressive at all. Without much issue, Kanao would be able to win her fight too. In this timeline, Tanjiro's battle against Rui plays out just like it did in the original. However, the aftermath is a bit different. Instead of sending Gyu and Shinobu, because her very capable Suguko was already on the scene, Shinobu would be the only Hashira to make an appearance. So instead of Gyu, the one to save Tanjiro and kill Rui would be her. And even more interestingly, the one to protect Nezuko from Shinobu on Tanjiro's behalf would be none other than Kanao herself. Now, of course, even despite technically being physically stronger, Kanao would not be able to hold her master back if she refused. But seeing this display of determination, insistence, and belief in something from her adopted sister would be more than enough to move Shinobu and cause her to at least question, which would then transition us to the Hashira meeting. Pretty much everything would remain the same, but with the Wind Hashira Sanemi being Genya's older brother, Tanjiro's involvement with his sibling would certainly come up in the conversation. Speaking of himself as an oldest sibling, protecting the second oldest of his family too would cause Sanemi, if even just briefly, to waver. From then on, Tanjiro would be taken to Butterfly Mansion to recover from his injuries as well as train. Genya and Kanao, by virtue of how their battles went down, wouldn't be injured, but would still stick around to be with him for a time. It's also Kanao's home, so being there would only be natural. Tanjiro would be even more of a celebrity there, since the attention wouldn't be as split as it normally was. And he'd also have the allure of being the boy that even made Kanao budge. During this time, he'd also managed to relieve her of the coin-tossing method, which would only bring the two closer. His friendship with Genya would also become very strong on account of their similar histories. As common as families being ruined by demon attacks may be, Tanjiro's particular story wasn't exactly relatable for either Zenitsu or Inosuke. Demons didn't make Zenitsu's backstory tragic in the least, and Inosuke couldn't even remember his past. Neither had any siblings and never knew what it was like to come from such a family. Genya, like Tanjiro, had lost his father at a young age and was made to assume a larger role. He had 7 siblings and resolved to protect and be there for them all. But now, he has only one sibling left. At this point, not only would Genya and Tanjiro become close, but Genya and Nezuko would also become close, or at least as close as she could manage in her demonic state. Genya's shyness around both her and Kanao would settle over time. They wouldn't be judgmental of his appearance in the slightest. In fact, Nezuko's comforting, head-patting nature, their shared situation as the second eldest children of their families, and similar circumstances as alternate demons would forge an incredibly strong bond between them. When it comes time for the Mugen Train arc, Tanjiro will probably be the only one of them who's unfamiliar with trains. Genya uses modern weaponry, and Kanao has been with the Butterfly siblings for years, and they have always been pretty modern with their medical practices. I'm sure they'd all be fond of Rengoku, but in this case, it's likely that Tanjiro would be the one to connect with and admire him the most, considering Genya and Kanao already have a Hashira they look up to. After being put to sleep by Enmu, Kanao would have a dream that explores more of her time with her sisters Kanae and Shinobu. In it, she'd actually be able to be expressive, instead of her previous emotionless self. This would provide a sentimental bit of closure for her and the late flower Hashira. But it wouldn't stop there. Apparently, Shinobu had several other Sugukos besides Kanao that all died fighting demons. Thanks to this dream, we would finally be able to see the complete butterfly family together. But like the natural lifespan of a butterfly, this time would be all too short. For Genya, his dream would be pretty similar to Tanjiro's. He'd be reunited with all his siblings and beloved mother. Overall, this would be a much more emotional train ride for everyone involved. We had ridiculous dreams for Inosuke and Zenitsu simply for the sake of emphasizing the turmoil of Tanjiro leaving his family, but unlike those two, Kanao and Genya are just as psychologically scarred as Tanjiro. So it would be pain all around. Speaking of pain, unfortunately, nothing changes for Rengoku's fate. Kanao would be needed to help Nezuko save the passengers and run into a similar situation as Zenitsu. Against Akaza, Genya might be able to demonize himself and shoot his gun. But that would be incredibly difficult considering the circumstances. To consume anything from Akaza, he would need to be close enough to do that, which would not be an option at all. If he shoots his gun, he could run the risk of hitting Rengoku in the process. And since Kaigaku was able to deflect the bullets with his sword, Akaza could probably just catch them and use them as projectiles of his own, endangering everyone on the field. In the end, the Flame Hashira Rengoku dies. Rengoku's death would further reinforce Genya's goal of becoming one of the Hashira. And Tanjiro would aim to do the very same thing alongside him. After Tanjiro's complete recovery and maybe a few missions, the Sound Hashira Tengen Uzui would appear, taking us to the Entertainment District arc. Now with the addition of Genya and Kanao, the original plan of infiltration by pretending to be women is thrown right out of the window. With Genya and Tanjiro both sporting facial scars, there is just no way that they would be able to pass as pretty girls. Fun fact, although Zenitsu was considered the especially ugly one for comedic effect, originally, when Gotoge first played around with the concept of gender swapping the main cast, they had Tanjiro be the ridiculously hideous one. Anyways, thankfully because they'd actually have a girl with them in the form of Kanao, they wouldn't need to pretend as much. Their investigation would need to be a bit more concentrated instead of spread out, but if Tengen really pushed his speed, things would still be able to work out. Kanao, instead of being a courtesan, would be a geisha, which is a similar occupation in the same environment, but one where she wouldn't need to tend to customers. From there, Genya and Tanjiro would serve as her rough and tough manservants, fetching her anything she might request for the sake of being able to investigate with an excuse prepared. When the time for actual fighting comes along, things are bound to move a lot smoother with Genya and Kanao here. Daki's Obi would make the matchup an absolute buffet for Genya. And while he's demonized, Gyutaro's poison would be useless against him. Kanao would also be a nightmare for Daki, thanks to her incredible vision allowing her to accurately predict the movements of others. Kanao is also remarkably fast, so Daki would really struggle to hit her. Throughout the main story, we never really received any indication of Kanao becoming stronger. The development of her character mostly revolved around her growth as a person instead. Kanao was able to keep up with and pose a threat to Upper Moon 2, and was even praised by the demon to be even more physically capable than the insect Hashira Shinobu. So between her and Tengen, we're pretty much looking at two demons versus two Hashira level fighters, an unpredictable sunbreather in the form of Tanjiro, and Genya, a pseudo-demon. So yeah, things go pretty well for them. Tengen doesn't lose an eye or an arm, and is still able to serve as a demon slayer. It is a huge win for the core, since they will have defeated an Upper Moon for the first time in 100 years, and avoided any major casualties in the process. Tanjiro's original trip to Swordsmith did not involve Zenitsu or Inosuke. Instead, Genya was there to help out. In this case, it would be Inosuke doing so. And despite initially being standoffish, Inosuke would actually be receptive to Tanjiro's attempt at friendship, with them both being in the nude. And it would definitely boil down to some sort of competition for Inosuke, but it wouldn't take long for him to become friendly. In fact, he would be here for a similar reason to Tanjiro, considering he is so prone to abusing his swords. Unlike how cold Genya was to Tanjiro despite his best efforts, Inosuke would have a blast with Tanjiro and really enjoy his company. When it comes to fighting upper rank 4, Genya's presence was invaluable, but Inosuke would be pretty useful too. Firstly, let's assume that he is still plenty strong even without all his adventures and training with Tanjiro and Zenitsu. He was surprisingly well aware of the Demon Slayer hierarchy and always strove to surpass and be stronger than everyone around him, so it's not hard to imagine. Next, thanks to his ability to actually use a breathing style and the overall unpredictability of Beast Breathing's wild movements, he'd be able to maintain the pressure against Hantengu's many forms. And thanks to his extreme flexibility, he would be able to shift his organs and avoid lethal blows too. He doesn't have regeneration or anything, but it would be enough to catch these guys off guard at a pivotal moment. When Tanjiro's blade turns red thanks to Nezuko's help, the same could be the case for Inosuke's twin blades, making his attacks even more devastating. His extreme sensory abilities would make it all too easy for him to spot the tiny Upper Moon demon and hunt him down like a boar finding truffles. And unlike Genya, he'd actually be able to cut the demon's neck. This would, by extension, cut the arc right there. The death of Upper Moon 4 and 5 would be yet another overwhelming victory for the Demon Slayers. And if the battle was cut off like that, Nezuko would have never been exposed to the sun. And if that never happened, Muzan would not have accelerated his plans and brought us to the Infinity Castle arc. Instead, everyone would have an opportunity to further refine their abilities and become even stronger. With more time, we would probably end up with a record number of Hashira. Tanjiro, Genya, and Kanao would all join their ranks. Besides Tengen still being a Hashira here, it's possible that Zenitsu and Inosuke would make it to this level too. Inosuke, thanks to his own path and involvement in Swordsmith Village. Zenitsu, because if Kaigaku becomes a demon, there is no way that he is not the one to take him down. And that is, of course, a possible feat required for the rank of Hashira. It would be a second renaissance for the Demon Slayer core. With how quickly and drastically all these characters managed to develop in such a short period of time with the original story, any additional time would be a game changer. Having this many Hashira would drastically improve the core's range of effectiveness and investigation. Without betting on Nezuko's sunlight resistance, Muzan would continue his hype for the Blue Spider Lily instead. This would pretty much lock his location and keep him attached to the pharmaceutical family. Even with all his many disguises, between Tanjiro's sense of smell, Zenitsu's hearing, Inosuke's vibrational awareness, Kanao's insane vision, and perhaps most of all, Genya's ability to tap into Muzan's telepathic communications after consuming high concentrations of his blood, it would only be a matter of time before they find him. All that being said, Muzan is still Muzan. He is ridiculously powerful, and even with this many Hashira, dealing with him at full strength would be a lot to handle. But aside from greater numbers and vastly increased strength, the additional time would allow the Demon Slayers to make even greater preparations against Muzan and his forces. Muzan vastly underestimates human capabilities and ingenuity. The simple traps they laid out against him were enough to greatly shift the final battle in their favor. Even more would definitely seal the deal. And if you don't think that's enough, in this timeline, they would actually be able to include Demon Nezuko in the final battle. Which, if you've seen our video on the subject, you'd know how overpowered she'd be against him. So I guess Tanjiro adventuring without Inosuke and Zenitsu wouldn't be such a bad thing after all. If you enjoyed this what if story and want to see more, let us know in the comments along with what you think. And here are even more videos like this one that you're bound to enjoy.